Monday night, my mother-in-law proudly introduced her Harvard-educated daughter-in-law to our dinner guests, showering her with praise while glancing at me with a strange, unreadable smile. Everyone thought it was just harmless comparison until she quietly followed me upstairs. The door clicked shut. A hand covered my mouth in the pitch-black room. Her whisper was not a threat. It was a warning. She pressed a small metal object into my palm and told me that if I signed the paper waiting for me downstairs, I would be going to federal prison instead of my husband. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old and a forensic accountant. I spent my entire life building my reputation from the ground up, only to find out that the family I married into was secretly planning to destroy me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who thought you were beneath them. Your support helps me share the truth. It all started last Monday at the sprawling Buckhead estate owned by my mother-in-law, Beatrice. Beatrice is a formidable woman. She is a former corporate executive who controls a vast fortune built by our ancestors, the kind of generational wealth that survived the hardest times in history. Walking into her mansion always felt like stepping onto a battlefield where the weapons were passive-aggressive compliments and designer clothes. That night was supposed to be a regular family dinner, but the air was thick with condescension the moment I walked through the double mahogany doors. We were seated in the formal dining room, under a glittering crystal chandelier that cost more than my first college tuition. To my left sat my husband Marcus, the golden child of the family. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, but completely oblivious to the tension as he always was. Across from me was my brother-in-law Julian and his new wife Chloe. Chloe is white 29 years old and never misses a single opportunity to remind everyone that she holds a corporate law degree from Harvard. She wears her Ivy League pedigree like a crown, using it to look down on anyone who did not grow up summering in the Hamptons. As the private chef served the second course of roasted duck and asparagus, Beatrice tapped her silver spoon against her crystal wine glass. She stood up, her posture perfectly rigid, and beamed down at Chloe. Beatrice went on and on about how Chloe had just saved the family business millions of dollars in taxes thanks to her brilliant legal mind. Beatrice actually called Chloe the intellectual savior of the family. Then, Beatrice slowly turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she gave this chilling, hollow smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. Chloe practically glowed under the praise. She took a delicate sip of her expensive Pinot Noir, leaned across the long mahogany table, and looked at me with fake sympathy. She said, "Maya, dealing with our trust funds must be so overwhelming for you. I suppose doing the books for local nail salons and small retail shops does not quite prepare you for the complexities of corporate tax law. But do not worry, I am happy to handle the heavy lifting for the family from now on." The sheer disrespect in her voice was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. I am a forensic accountant. I track down hidden assets, expose massive corporate fraud, and work alongside federal agencies to put white-collar criminals behind bars. But to Chloe, because I did not have a trust fund and an Ivy League background, I was just a glorified calculator. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the insult wash over me without changing my expression. I remembered exactly who I was and where I came from. I did not have parents to write a massive check for my tuition or buy me a luxury car for graduation. I grew up in the foster care system, moving from one crowded group home to another. When I was 18, I left that system with nothing but $50 in my pocket and a fierce determination to never depend on anyone for my survival. I grinded for every single grade. I earned a full academic scholarship to Spelman College, a historically Black college that taught me the true meaning of sisterhood and excellence. I worked 3 jobs while studying late into the night, living on ramen noodles and sheer willpower. Eventually, I built my own highly successful forensic accounting firm from absolute scratch. I earned every penny in my bank account through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Chloe, on the other hand, was born with a silver spoon so deep in her mouth it was a miracle she could speak at all. Her father was a legacy donor to her university. Her prestigious corporate internship was secured by her uncle before she even finished high school. She had never faced a single day of actual struggle or financial panic in her entire life. Yet here she was sitting at a table with my husband and his family, trying to make me feel small and insignificant. I looked to my left, expecting my husband Marcus to defend me. I expected him to remind Chloe that my firm pulls in 7 figures a year. Instead, Marcus just kept cutting his steak, entirely avoiding my eyes. He chewed his food slowly, pretending he did not hear the blatant insult directed at his own wife. That deafening silence from the man who stood at an altar and promised to protect me spoke volumes. It hurt more than Chloe and her arrogant words ever could. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my drink across the table or cause a scene. I simply placed my white linen napkin on the table, pushed my heavy chair back, and stood up with perfect posture. I smiled politely at the entire table, excused myself, and calmly stated that I needed to go upstairs to get my coat, because I was feeling a bit chilly. I walked out of the dining room and began climbing the grand, sweeping staircase. With every step I took, the heavy weight of their judgment seemed to follow me, but I kept my back straight. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway and stepped into the sprawling guest bedroom where we had left our coats. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the heavy velvet window curtains. I walked over to the large oak bed and reached for my jacket. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door slammed shut behind me. The loud click of the brass lock echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Before I could even gasp or turn around, a strong, firm hand clamped tightly over my mouth. I froze completely, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. The unmistakable scent of expensive rose and sandalwood perfume filled my senses. It was Beatrice. She leaned in close from behind me, her lips barely an inch from my ear. Her voice was an urgent, raspy whisper, completely stripped of the arrogant and composed tone she had used at the dinner table just moments ago. "Do not scream," she whispered sharply. "I am going to take my hand away, but you must remain completely silent. Do you understand me?" I gave a frantic, tiny nod, my eyes wide with shock in the dark room. She slowly pulled her hand away from my mouth, stepping around to face me. In the dim moonlight, I could barely make out the sharp contours of her face, but her eyes were wide and filled with a desperate, terrifying intensity I had never seen before in all the years I had known her. She grabbed my right hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and pressed a small, cold metal USB drive into my bare palm. She folded my fingers over it, forcing my hand into a tight fist. "Take this USB," she hissed softly. "Hide it in your pocket right now and do not let anyone see it. They are using your signature and your company credentials to launder $5 million from the family estate." My breath hitched in my throat. I tried to process the words, but my mind was spinning out of control. $5 million. Money laundering. My signature. Who? I whispered back, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Your husband and that Harvard little girl downstairs?" Beatrice replied, her voice dripping with pure venom and disgust. "They think I am getting old and blind. They think they can bleed this family dry and use your accounting firm as the perfect cover for their tracks. Marcus is waiting for you in the living room right now with a standard family tax declaration. He is going to tell you it is just routine paperwork. If you sign the paper downstairs tonight, you will be the one going to federal prison in their place. Now put this in your pocket, walk back down those stairs, and do exactly what I taught you. Smile, play the fool, and do not sign a single thing." The heavy oak door unlatched, and Beatrice slipped out into the hallway, leaving me alone in the dark. My fingers traced the cold edges of the flash drive in my pocket. $5 million. Federal prison. The words echoed in my mind, threatening to pull me under a wave of panic. But I am a forensic accountant. I do not panic. I analyze data, I find the discrepancies, and I build an airtight case. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed down the invisible wrinkles on the front of my dress, and walked out of the bedroom. Descending the grand sweeping staircase, the sounds of polite laughter and clinking crystal drifted up from the dining room. It sounded like a perfectly normal, wealthy family enjoying a Monday night dinner. But everything had shifted. The glittering chandelier overhead now felt like a harsh spotlight in a police interrogation room. The laughter bouncing off the walls sounded hollow, practiced, and entirely predatory. As I stepped back into the formal dining room, the conversation abruptly stopped. All eyes turned to me at once. The suffocating weight of their collective gaze pressed down on my chest. They were waiting for me. Marcus immediately stood up from his chair at the head of the table. His charismatic, charming smile was perfectly in place, but his eyes were entirely empty of any real warmth. He walked over to me holding a sleek black leather folder and a heavy silver Mont Blanc pen. "There you are, my love," he said smoothly, wrapping a warm arm around my waist. His touch, which used to bring me comfort and a sense of safety, now made my skin crawl with revulsion. "Since you are here, we actually need to take care of a little administrative housekeeping before dessert." He opened the leather folder and placed it on the mahogany table right in front of my empty chair. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents with a bright yellow sticky note pointing to a signature line at the very bottom of the final page. Chloe noticed some minor discrepancies in the family trust tax filings. Marcus continued, his voice light and casual, as if he were asking me to sign a birthday card for a distant relative. "It is just a routine family tax declaration. We are consolidating some of the estate assets to optimize our tax bracket for the upcoming fiscal year. I have already signed my portion. We just need your signature as a formality, since your accounting firm is listed as our secondary auditor. Just sign right there on the bottom line so we can get to the dessert course." The chef prepared a lovely crème brûlée. I stared at the black ink on the page. The document was dense with sophisticated legal jargon, but my trained eyes instantly caught the subtle restructuring clauses buried deep in the third paragraph. It was not a tax declaration. It was an authorization for a massive transfer of liability. If I signed this piece of paper, my firm would legally take ownership of a massive, unvetted debt structure. They were trying to make me the fall guy. I looked up at Marcus, offering him the exact polite, unsuspecting smile his mother had instructed me to wear just moments ago. "I appreciate you handling the housekeeping, Marcus," I said softly. "But you know my professional policy. I never sign financial declarations regarding my firm without running them through my own legal compliance software first. I will take a copy to my office tomorrow morning, review it with my team, and get it back to you." The room went dead silent. The easy, charismatic smile completely vanished from Marcus's face, replaced by a tight, rigid line of irritation. He let out a loud, condescending sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose, as if he were dealing with a stubborn, unruly child. "Maya, please do not do this right now," he said, his tone dropping an octave into something cold and demanding. "Do not make a scene over absolutely nothing. It is a standard compliance form. Chloe drafted it herself." "Are you saying you do not trust your own family?" "I am saying I am a licensed financial professional," I replied, keeping my voice steady and completely calm. "And my federal license requires strict due diligence." That was when the gaslighting truly began. It was a coordinated psychological attack designed to make me feel small, irrational, and completely crazy. Julian, my brother-in-law, leaned back in his expensive chair and scoffed loudly, tossing his linen napkin onto the table. "Come on, Maya. You are always so deeply paranoid about money. It is exhausting to be around. You are part of a wealthy family now. You do not have to count every single penny like you are still struggling to pay rent in a cramped dorm room. We have people to handle these complicated things for us. Just let Chloe do her job." Marcus placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing my collarbone just a little too tight. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a patronizing whisper meant to make me feel embarrassed. "You are embarrassing me, Maya. You are letting your irrational anxiety ruin a beautiful evening with our guests. Chloe spent hours putting this together to protect our assets. Just sign the paper. Stop being so difficult and combative. They were circling me, closing ranks. Their words were carefully chosen weapons designed to suffocate my intuition. This is exactly how families like this operate. They use their wealth, their polished manners, and their sheer numbers to make you question your own reality. If you push back, you are the crazy one. You are the difficult one. You are the outsider who just does not know how high society works. Then Chloe decided to step into the ring to deliver the final blow. She crossed her arms, tilting her head with an expression of exaggerated mocking pity. She looked at me like I was a tragic charity case who had just spit on a generous donation. Maya, I really try to be understanding of your background, Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and condescension. I know it must be deeply intimidating for you to be surrounded by people who understand complex corporate structures on a level you simply were not taught. But you always carry your insecurity as a woman of color who did not attend an Ivy League school to resent me. You project your own professional shortcomings onto my meticulous work. I am just trying to help your husband secure your financial future, and you are acting entirely unhinged. The sheer audacity of her statement hung heavy in the stifling air. She sat there, a woman who had never worked a 60-hour week in her entire life, using my race and my hard-earned background as weapons to manipulate me into signing away my freedom. They thought I would crumble. They thought the overwhelming fear of being labeled an angry, insecure, uneducated woman would force me to pick up that silver pen and submit to their demands just to keep the peace. I looked at Julian, who was rolling his eyes at the ceiling. I looked at Marcus, who was holding the pen out to me like a master training an obedient dog. And finally, I looked at Chloe, who was taking another slow, triumphant sip of her expensive Pinot Noir. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. Instead, I reached out and took the heavy silver Mont Blanc pen from Marcus's outstretched hand. I saw a fleeting flash of victory in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought I was finally broken and put in my place. I stepped toward the edge of the mahogany table, moving directly in front of Chloe. I raised the heavy metal pen, gripping it tightly in my fist, but I did not move toward the legal document. With a swift, blinding motion, I drove the sharp metal tip of the pen straight down into the fragile center of Chloe's wine glass. The crystal shattered with a violent, explosive crack that echoed through the massive room. Dark red wine blasted across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing violently across the front of Chloe's designer silk blouse and splattering against her pale face. It looked exactly like blood. Chloe let out a piercing, terrified shriek, pushing her heavy wooden chair back so fast it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. She scrambled backward, clutching her ruined blouse. Julian jumped to his feet, shouting something completely incomprehensible. Marcus stood frozen in absolute shock, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the shattered shards of crystal and the massive pool of red liquid soaking rapidly into his fraudulent documents. Nobody moved to touch me. The air in the room was completely sucked out, leaving behind a stunned, terrified silence. I calmly dropped the silver pen onto the ruined, wine-soaked tax declaration. "Clean that up," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the silent room like the crack of a whip. I turned my back on all of them. I walked out of the formal dining room, my heels clicking methodically against the cold marble floor. I did not look back when Marcus finally found his voice and yelled my name in panic. I walked straight out the heavy mahogany front doors, stepping out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night air. I got into my car, locked the doors securely, and started the engine. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the massive surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The subservient woman they thought they could manipulate was officially dead. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small metal USB drive Beatrice had pressed into my hand. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat, the bright screen cutting through the dark interior of my car. I took a deep, focused breath, inserted the drive into the port, and double-clicked the first encrypted folder. It was time to see exactly how many years my husband and his Ivy League sister-in-law were going to spend behind bars. The glow of the laptop screen cast a harsh blue light across my face in the dark, silent interior of my car. I was parked halfway down the street from Beatrice's sprawling estate, hidden in the shadows of the old oak trees. I did not cry. I did not shake. The humiliated wife who had just shattered a crystal wine glass in a dining room full of elitists was gone. In her place was the woman who had clawed her way out of the foster care system, the lead forensic accountant who tore apart multi-million-dollar corporate frauds for breakfast. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, and opened the first encrypted folder on the small metal drive. Beatrice had handed me the master key to the family vault, and I was about to blow the door right off its hinges. The files were dense, thousands of pages of ledger entries, bank routing numbers, and legal contracts. It was designed to look incredibly intimidating, the kind of paperwork that would make an average person's eyes glaze over in pure confusion. But to me, numbers are a second language. They tell a story that words always try to hide. It took me exactly 22 minutes to trace the $5 million. Chloe thought she was a genius. She had set up a convoluted web of 6 different shell companies registered in Delaware using complex corporate terminology to disguise the flow of capital. She was using a classic layering technique, bouncing funds between offshore accounts to make the money look like legitimate consulting fees. But to someone who hunts financial criminals alongside federal agencies, her structure was not brilliant. It was arrogant, sloppy, and entirely predictable. I watched the cursor blink on the screen as the horrifying reality of their trap became crystal clear. The money was being steadily drained from Beatrice's primary estate accounts, liquidating assets that had been in the family for generations. And right there, attached to every single transfer authorization, was my digital signature and my firm's federal operating license number. Marcus had stolen my secure login credentials. He had bypassed my two-factor authentication by accessing my secondary work phone while I was sleeping. If the Internal Revenue Service or the Federal Bureau of Investigation ever audited the family trust, the paper trail would not point to the Golden Boy or the Harvard lawyer. It would lead directly to my desk. Marcus and Chloe would walk away entirely clean with $5 million, and I would be indicted for massive federal fraud. I would lose my business, my license, and my freedom. Beatrice had been telling the absolute truth. They were setting me up to be the sacrificial lamb. But a good forensic accountant never stops at the first anomaly. When you find one cockroach, you pull up the floorboards to find the entire nest. The anger bubbling in my chest transformed into a cold, clinical focus. I started running Marcus's personal social security number through a private, highly secure financial database I use for my corporate investigations. I was looking for his kickbacks. I wanted to see where he was hiding his cut of the stolen estate money. Instead, the document that popped up on my screen made my blood run entirely cold. It was a commercial property lien, a massive high-interest corporate mortgage. 3 years ago, Marcus had taken out a commercial loan for nearly $800,000. But he did not use his own trust fund or his investment portfolio as collateral. He had forged my physical signature and used the operating license and the projected revenue of my forensic accounting firm to secure the debt. He had weaponized my life's work, the business I built from absolute scratch, the company I grew while living in a tiny studio apartment, eating cheap canned soup and working 18-hour days. He had secretly chained a massive anchor of debt to my neck without me ever knowing. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I frantically scrolled down the digital document to see where the funds from the loan had been dispersed. The money did not go into our joint savings account. It did not go toward the mortgage on our beautiful home. Monthly installments of tens of thousands of dollars were being systematically wired directly into a corporate account named Chloe Corporate Counsel, LLC. The betrayal hit me so hard, I physically gasped for air, clutching the leather steering wheel as a sharp pain radiated through my chest. I closed my eyes, and a flood of memories from our early years together rushed into my mind. When Marcus and I were first married, He wanted to get his master's degree in finance at a prestigious private university. We were completely broke at the time. I took on 3 extra bookkeeping jobs for local restaurants and small retail shops just to pay his tuition in cash so he would not have to take out high-interest student loans. I wore the same cheap shoes for 2 straight years. I skipped lunches. I poured every single ounce of my energy and my youth into building him up, into making sure the golden child of the wealthy family could maintain his perfect, successful image. I sacrificed my own comfort so he could shine. And exactly how did my loving husband repay my unwavering loyalty? By secretly mortgaging the very firm I bled to build all, to bankroll his pretentious Ivy League sister-in-law's boutique law practice. For 3 entire years, the equity I brought home from tracking down fraudsters was quietly being funneled out the back door to finance Chloe. My money was paying for her designer clothes, her luxury car, and her expensive high-rise office space downtown. Marcus had handed my hard-earned legacy over to a woman who looked down on me, simply because I was a woman of color who did not come from generational wealth. They had not just tried to frame me for tax fraud tonight. They had been actively, maliciously bleeding me dry for years. A lesser woman would have marched right back into that massive Buckhead mansion, thrown the laptop at his perfectly groomed head, and screamed until her vocal cords tore. A lesser woman would have called a divorce lawyer right then and there, crying to anyone who would listen about being a helpless victim of financial abuse. But I do not throw tantrums. I do not beg for explanations from people who never respected me in the first place. I gather the receipts. I sat in the dark car until the dashboard clock read 3 in the morning. I worked in total silence, downloading every single file, every forged signature, and every IP address log from the USB drive into a highly encrypted offshore cloud server that only I could access. I created triple backups. I secured the digital evidence so tightly that not even a team of federal hackers could wipe it away. Then I formatted Beatrice's USB drive, wiping it completely clean of all data. I put the car in drive and headed back to the house Marcus and I shared. The sky was just beginning to turn a pale, bruised shade of purple as the sun peeked over the Atlanta skyline. I parked in the garage, stepped out of the car, smoothed my dress, and unlocked the front door. The house was dead quiet. I walked into our pristine, custom-designed kitchen and started the coffee maker. The rich smell of dark roast beans filled the air, grounding me. At exactly 6 in the morning, I heard Marcus's heavy footsteps coming down the hardwood stairs. He walked into the kitchen looking exhausted, his tie undone and his shoulders tense. He was nervous. He was bracing himself for a massive fight. He fully expected to find a broken, hysterical woman ready to scream about being disrespected at a family dinner. I turned around holding a steaming mug of black coffee in my hands. I looked him right in the eye, gave him my warmest, most loving smile, and handed him the cup. "Good morning, honey," I said, my voice soft, sweet, and perfectly steady. "I am so sorry about my behavior last night. I was just stressed from work and being way too sensitive about Chloe's comments. You were absolutely right to correct me. It will never happen again." Marcus blinked, clearly stunned by my sudden submission. Then a slow, arrogant smile spread across his face as he took the coffee cup, fully believing he had finally broken my spirit. He had no idea that the woman standing in his kitchen was no longer his wife. She was his executioner. Marcus took a long, slow sip of the hot coffee, his chest puffing out with an arrogant sense of victory. He truly believed he had tamed the wild, independent woman he married. He reached out, patting my shoulder with a patronizing gentleness that made my skin crawl. He told me he had an exhausting day ahead at the firm and needed to take a long shower to clear his head. I watched him turn around and walk confidently out of the kitchen. The absolute second his back disappeared around the corner, my warm, submissive smile dropped into a mask of pure ice. I listened carefully as his heavy footsteps moved up the stairs and down the hallway to our master bathroom. The heavy glass shower door clicked shut. The rush of water blasted through the pipes. I had exactly 10 minutes. I moved through the house with absolute silence. I did not run. I glided up the stairs, my mind operating with the chilling precision of a machine. The world around me felt slightly tilted, distorted by the massive weight of the betrayal, but my steps were perfectly grounded. I slipped into our master bedroom. The air was thick with steam rolling out from under the bathroom door. Marcus's personal cell phone and his encrypted corporate tablet were sitting right there on the edge of the mahogany nightstand. For a normal wife, a locked corporate smartphone is an impenetrable fortress. For a woman who regularly dissects the digital footprints of corrupt executives, it was an open window. Marcus had recently changed his passcode, thinking he was being incredibly clever. What my arrogant husband did not realize was that 6 months ago, when I upgraded our home network security, I routed all of his devices through a shadow server. But I did not even need to go that deep today. I knew Marcus. I knew his lazy habits. I picked up his phone, tilted the black screen under the soft glow of the bedside lamp, and looked closely at the fingerprint smudges left on the glass. People are creatures of habit. They swipe the same patterns over and over. I traced the oily residue, deduced the new 6-digit code, and unlocked his device in less than 30 seconds. I bypassed his standard text messages and emails. Criminals never use the front door. I immediately opened a disguised calculator application that I knew was actually a vault for a hidden cloud server. It required a secondary biometric scan, but I simply plugged a small decryption dongle from my pocket into the charging port of his phone, a tool I use for federal audits. The vault cracked open instantly. I expected to find more offshore bank accounts. I expected to find more forged loan documents or wire transfers to shell companies. But what loaded onto the screen was infinitely more disgusting. It was a massive photo gallery and an endless scroll of encrypted chat logs. The first image was a selfie of Marcus and Chloe. They were not at a family dinner or a corporate event. They were lying in a hotel bed tangled in white sheets. Chloe was holding up a glass of expensive champagne to the camera, wearing a diamond necklace that I recognized from Marcus's credit card statement last Christmas. The necklace, he told me, was a bonus gift for a high-performing employee at his firm. My stomach violently dropped, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. The chat logs dated back nearly 3 years, the exact same timeline as the fraudulent commercial mortgage he took out in my name. They were not just business partners in a massive financial crime. Marcus and Chloe were having a full-blown, passionate affair right under the noses of our entire family. I read their messages, my eyes scanning the text with a clinical detachment that surprised even me. They laughed at us. They actively mocked the people who loved them. Chloe sent paragraphs complaining about how boring and suffocating her marriage to Julian was, calling my brother-in-law a weak, gullible fool. Marcus replied with equal cruelty about me. He called me his little workhorse. He bragged to Chloe about how easy it was to manipulate me because I was so desperate for the stable family life I never had growing up. He typed that keeping me busy with my accounting firm was the perfect distraction, so he could spend his weekends downtown with her. The sheer level of disrespect was staggering. They were using my money, my business, and my exhausting work hours to fund their illicit romance. But as vile as the affair was, it was not the darkest secret buried in that hidden cloud server. I tapped on a folder labeled Estate Planning. Inside was a dense 70-page legal document drafted by Chloe's boutique law firm. It was a petition for involuntary conservatorship and psychiatric committal. I read the summary page and my blood ran completely cold. The petition was aggressively targeting Beatrice. Chloe had spent months compiling entirely fabricated medical records and manipulated witness statements to legally declare my mother-in-law mentally incompetent. They cited Beatrice's occasional forgetfulness as severe early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The legal strategy was utterly ruthless. They were planning to present this document to a federal judge next month, forcibly remove Beatrice from her own home, and lock her away in a high-security state-run mental institution. Once Beatrice was declared incompetent and locked away, Marcus would be appointed as her primary legal guardian. He would gain absolute, unchecked control over the entire family estate. The legacy, the real estate, and the multi-million-dollar trust funds. And because I was set up to take the fall for the $5 million they were currently laundering, I would be sitting in a federal prison cell, completely unable to stop them. Marcus and Chloe would be free to divorce their respective spouses, liquidate the entire family empire, and walk away obscenely rich. It was a masterclass in pure, unadulterated evil. They were going to destroy an elderly woman's freedom and frame an innocent wife just to fund their twisted happily ever after. The sound of the shower water abruptly stopped. The sudden silence in the adjacent bathroom snapped my focus back to the present second. I quickly disconnected my decryption tool, closed the hidden vault, and wiped the screen clean with the sleeve of my shirt. I placed the phone back on the exact same spot on the mahogany nightstand, angling it precisely the way Marcus had left it. I slipped silently out of the master bedroom and glided back down the stairs, returning to the kitchen just as I heard the bathroom door open upstairs. I stood perfectly still by the marble kitchen island, my mind racing with the horrifying weight of everything I had just uncovered. I needed a strategy. I needed to move faster than two people who thought they were already crossing the finish line. Suddenly, my personal cell phone buzzed in my pocket. It was not my standard number, but a secure encrypted messaging app I only used for highly confidential whistleblowers at work. Very few people even knew that number existed. I pulled the phone out and looked at the bright screen. The message was from an untraceable anonymous number. It contained only two short sentences. Meet mother at diner number 9 on the edge of town. Tell absolutely no one. I stared at the glowing text. Beatrice. The formidable, terrifying matriarch who had clamped her hand over my mouth in the dark just hours ago. She knew. Maybe she did not know about the affair, but she knew her son and her daughter-in-law were coming for her throat. I locked my phone, grabbed my car keys from the counter, and walked out the door. The time for playing the submissive wife was officially over. It was time to go to war. The drive to the outskirts of the city took 40 minutes, but my mind was moving 1,000,000 miles a minute. Diner number 9 was a relic of a bygone era, sitting alone on a desolate stretch of highway. Its neon sign flickered weakly in the early morning fog. It was the absolute last place anyone from high society would ever set foot in, which made it the perfect place for a secret meeting. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The bell chimed, echoing in the nearly empty restaurant. The air smelled of stale coffee and fried bacon. I scanned the room and saw her sitting in the very back booth, shrouded in the dim light. Beatrice was dressed impeccably in a dark tailored trench coat, her posture as rigid and commanding as a general preparing for battle. I slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from her. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. We sat perfectly still, two women separated by a generation, separated by class, and historically separated by a mutual unspoken dislike for one another. But as I looked into her sharp, piercing eyes, the tension between us shifted into something entirely different. It was mutual respect. She reached across the sticky table and pushed a steaming mug of black coffee toward me. Her hand did not tremble. Her gaze was entirely clear. "I do not have Alzheimer's disease," Beatrice said flatly, her voice cutting through the quiet diner like a scalpel. "I never did. My memory is as sharp today as it was 30 years ago." I stared at her, absorbing the massive weight of her confession. "You faked it," I said, keeping my voice low. "You pretended to be confused. You let them think your mind was deteriorating." "Why?" Beatrice took a slow sip of her coffee, never breaking eye contact. "Because wealth is a terrible magnifying glass, Maya. It exposes exactly who people really are. When my late husband passed away, I saw the greed begin to pool in my children's eyes. Marcus and Julian grew up with every privilege I fought to give them, but privilege breeds entitlement. I needed to know what they would do when they thought the matriarch was no longer capable of holding the reins. I needed to know if my own blood would protect me, or if they would try to slaughter me for the inheritance. Now I know." She leaned forward, the dim diner light casting harsh shadows across her cheekbones. She looked formidable, terrifying, and completely heartbroken all at once. I gave you the flash drive tonight because I knew they were making their move with the money, Beatrice continued. I knew Chloe set up those shell companies, but I needed an expert to track the exact route. I needed a forensic accountant who could not be bought. Tell me exactly what you found. I did not sugarcoat it. I looked directly into my mother-in-law's eyes and laid out every single piece of the brutal truth. I told her about the $5 million being funneled into offshore accounts under Chloe's control. I told her how Marcus had stolen my digital credentials to make me the fall guy for federal fraud. But then I told her the things she did not know. I unlocked my phone and slid it across the table. I told her about the hidden cloud server. I showed her the massive commercial mortgage Marcus had secretly chained to my business 3 years ago to fund Chloe's boutique law firm. And finally, I opened the encrypted photo gallery. I showed her the pictures of Marcus and Chloe tangled in hotel bedsheets. I showed her the agonizing, cruel text messages where her son and her daughter-in-law mocked our entire family. Beatrice stared at the screen for a long time. She did not cry. She did not gasp. But the temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. The betrayal of her son having an affair with his brother's wife was a moral failing so deep it defied logic. But it was the final document I pulled up that finally made her hands clench into tight, shaking fists. I opened the 70-page legal petition for involuntary conservatorship. They are not just stealing from you, Beatrice, I whispered softly. They are planning to declare you legally insane. They are going to present this to a judge next month. They want to forcibly remove you from your home, lock you in a state-run psychiatric ward, and give Marcus absolute control over every single penny of the family estate. Beatrice slowly pushed the phone back to me. When she looked up, the heartbreak in her eyes was entirely gone. It had been replaced by a cold, calculating fury that sent a shiver down my spine. My grandfather built our family empire from the literal ashes of segregation, Beatrice said, her voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal intensity. He shined shoes. He bought real estate when the banks refused to lend to black men. He built businesses in neighborhoods where the police would not even patrol. When I took over the estate, I sat in oak-paneled boardrooms filled with old money white men who smiled in my face and tried to legally steal everything my family built. I fought them tooth and nail. I destroyed their careers, and I protected our legacy. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was like a steel vice. I did not fight off generations of ruthless corporate predators just to hand my ancestors' wealth over to a privileged, arrogant little white girl from Harvard. Beatrice said, her eyes burning into mine. And I certainly did not raise a son to be a weak, spineless thief who would sell out his own mother and destroy a brilliant, hardworking black woman just to fund his illicit affair. Marcus is dead to me. Chloe is a parasite, and we are going to exterminate them. I looked at the woman sitting across from me. For years, Beatrice had judged me for my lack of pedigree. She had looked down on my foster care background. But in this gritty diner, none of that mattered. We were two women who had been chronically underestimated by the people closest to us. We had been used, manipulated, and positioned to take the fall for their monstrous greed. They thought they could pit the insecure wife and the senile mother against each other. Instead, they had just forged the most dangerous alliance imaginable. I squeezed her hand back, sealing the silent pact between us. I am going to rip their financial structure down to the studs, I said calmly. I am going to trace every stolen dollar, and I am going to make sure the federal government handles the rest. But we have to move quietly. If they realize we know their plan, Chloe will accelerate the conservatorship filing and freeze all the accounts before we can secure the assets. We will give them exactly what they want to see. Beatrice replied, a dark, dangerous smile slowly forming on her lips. We will play our parts flawlessly. You will be the heartbroken, stressed-out wife trying to save her marriage. I will be the confused, deteriorating old woman wandering the halls, Let them get comfortable. Let them think they have won. Arrogance is always the precursor to a spectacular downfall. We spent the next hour detailing a meticulous bulletproof strategy. We outlined the exact legal and financial maneuvers required to pull the rug out from under Marcus and Chloe without them noticing a single thing. We were going to build a financial fortress that even a Harvard law degree could not penetrate. Just as we were finalizing the timeline, my phone vibrated violently against the diner table. The sudden noise made us both jump. I glanced down at the screen. It was Julian. My brother-in-law never called me this early in the morning unless it was an absolute emergency. I looked at Beatrice, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs. I swiped the screen and answered the call, putting the phone on speaker so we could both hear. Maya, Julian said, his voice breathless and frantic on the other end of the line. "Where are you? Are you at the house?" "I am running errands," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "What is wrong, Julian? You sound panicked." "It is..." Mother, Julian said, his voice trembling with what sounded like genuine distress. "Chloe and Marcus just called an emergency meeting with the family lawyers. They did not wait until next month like they originally discussed. Chloe went to the courthouse the second it opened this morning. She filed an emergency petition to the Supreme Court for a temporary conservatorship. They told the judge Mother had a violent episode last night. The blood drained from my face. I locked eyes with Beatrice across the table. They are coming for her today, Maya, Julian continued, completely unaware that he was speaking to a woman who already knew his wife was sleeping with his brother. The judge signed an emergency temporary order based on Chloe's medical affidavits. They are sending medical transport and a court-appointed guardian to the Buckhead estate this afternoon to strip Mother of her personal rights and remove her from the property. You need to get here. I ended the call and set the phone down on the table. The diner was completely silent again. Marcus and Chloe had moved up the timeline. They were not waiting. The trap had just violently snapped shut, and the countdown had officially begun. I drove away from diner number 9 with a singular, icy focus. The highway stretched out before me like a long gray ribbon, but my mind was already 10 steps ahead of the people trying to ruin me. I stopped at a gas station just outside the city limits to fill my tank. When I swiped my metallic joint credit card at the pump, the digital screen flashed bright red. Declined. I pulled out my secondary debit card tied to our joint household checking account. Declined. Marcus had not wasted a single second. While I was sitting in a diner booth forming a blood pact with his mother, he was aggressively moving to cut off my resources. He had frozen our joint accounts, trying to starve me out financially before the real battle even began. It was a classic heavy-handed tactic used by financial abusers to instill immediate panic and compliance. Fortunately, I am a forensic accountant who never mixes her primary corporate assets with her marital funds. I used my secret business card to pay for the gas and drove straight back to our neighborhood. Walking into our massive custom-built home felt entirely different this time. The spacious vaulted ceilings and minimalist decor suddenly felt like an oversized cage. I stood alone in the grand foyer, the sheer scale of the house making me look small and isolated. The silence of the large space was heavy, pressing down on me, but my mind was a labyrinth of calculated predatory maneuvers. I was not the victim they thought I was. I was the architect of their downfall. I walked toward the living room and froze in the doorway. Marcus was not alone. Chloe was sitting comfortably on my expensive Italian leather sofa, her legs elegantly crossed, holding a thick stack of legal folders on her lap. She was wearing a perfectly tailored designer suit, looking every bit the ruthless Ivy League lawyer. Marcus was leaning over the glass coffee table, reviewing the documents with her. They were openly discussing the emergency medical transport and the psychiatric hold for Beatrice right in my living room, not even bothering to hide their conspiracy anymore. Marcus looked up, his expression hardening instantly when he saw me standing there. Chloe simply smirked. A look of pure, unadulterated triumph danced in her bright blue eyes. She set her coffee cup down on a coaster with a soft click. Maya Marcus said coldly, straightening his posture to tower over me. We need you to go upstairs, pack a bag, and leave the premises immediately. I maintained a mask of calm confusion, keeping my voice perfectly level. This is my house, Marcus. My name is on the deed just as much as yours. You cannot legally force me to leave without an eviction notice or a court order. Chloe let out a patronizing, high-pitched little laugh. She closed her legal folder, tapped her manicured fingernails against the cardboard cover, and leaned forward. Actually, Maya, given your erratic and dangerous behavior last night, Marcus does not feel safe with you living under the same roof. You violently shattered a glass with a sharp object right in front of my face. We have a dining room full of credible high society witnesses who saw you lose your temper and destroy property. If you refuse to leave gracefully right now, I will personally call the police and file a domestic violence report. She paused, letting her threat hang in the air, her eyes dripping with a sickening racial malice. With your background, how do you think a judge will view an aggressive, unstable woman of color attacking a prominent corporate attorney? You will be arrested, Maya. Your federal auditing license will be suspended pending a criminal investigation, and your little accounting firm will collapse overnight. So I suggest you go upstairs and pack. The sheer audacity of her threat was staggering. It was a calculated psychological strike designed to provoke me into an actual rage. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to throw something or lunge at her so she could dial the police, play the terrified victim, and have me hauled out of my own home in handcuffs. She was weaponizing my race and my hard-earned professional license to force my submission. I looked at Marcus. He stood there with his arms crossed, fully supporting his mistress, as she threatened to ruin his wife's life over a fabricated police report. He looked completely detached, as if he were simply watching a business transaction play out. I did not yell. I did not cry. Instead, I let my shoulders slump forward just a fraction. I forced my eyes to dart nervously to the floor, perfectly playing the role of a terrified, defeated woman who had just realized she was completely outmatched by the power and privilege in the room. I let my voice tremble, pushing out the exact tone of surrender they were waiting to hear. Okay, I whispered softly, looking down at my shoes. You do not need to call the police. I will go pack my things and leave. The look of profound, arrogant satisfaction that washed over Chloe's face was genuinely sickening. She leaned back against the plush cushions of my sofa, picking up her coffee cup with a victorious sigh. She took a slow sip, relishing her total victory over the inferior woman who had dared to step out of her place. Marcus let out a breath he had been holding, his chest puffing out with pride. They thought they had entirely broken me. They thought I was retreating to lick my wounds in defeat. I turned around and walked slowly up the hardwood stairs, keeping my head bowed and my steps heavy. But the absolute second I stepped into the master bedroom and closed the heavy door behind me, my posture snapped back to perfect, rigid alignment. My hands were not shaking. My heart was beating at a slow, steady rhythm. I walked over to the walk-in closet and pulled two large suitcases from the top shelf. I began throwing my clothes, toiletries, and shoes inside, making sure to open and close drawers loudly enough so they could hear me packing from downstairs. But clothes were not the only things I needed to handle before I left this house. As a forensic accountant who conducts corporate espionage investigations, my professional toolkit involves much more than spreadsheets and tax software. I walked over to my secure leather work briefcase and unzipped a hidden interior lining. Inside a small velvet pouch were three tiny button-sized surveillance cameras. They were military-grade equipment fitted with wide-angle lenses, advanced motion sensors, and continuous audio recording capabilities. Most importantly, they did not rely on the home Wi-Fi network. They transmitted on a secure cellular frequency linked directly to an encrypted server on my private phone. I slipped the tiny cameras into my pocket and grabbed a stack of Marcus's dry cleaning to pretend I was sorting his clothes. I walked down the hall and stepped into his home office, a room he foolishly thought was his impenetrable private sanctuary. I placed the first tiny lens perfectly inside the hollowed-out spine of a thick leather-bound legal dictionary sitting on his bookshelf. It gave me a crystal clear, high-definition view of his massive mahogany desk, his computer screen, and the safe in the corner of the room. I moved back out to the upstairs landing, casually leaning over the balcony, as if I were taking a moment to catch my breath. I wedged the second camera into the intricate, dark metal molding of the grand chandelier base. It was completely invisible from the ground, providing a complete overhead view of the living room where he and Chloe were still whispering and celebrating their win. I walked back into the master bedroom. The third camera went directly behind the slatted ventilation grate directly above our bed, angled perfectly to capture the entire room. If they were going to use my house as their illicit playground and their criminal headquarters, I was going to document every single second of it. I finished packing my bags and zipped my suitcases shut, the loud metallic sound echoing in the quiet room. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure surveillance application. 3 crisp high-definition video feeds immediately popped onto my glowing screen. I could hear Chloe's arrogant, mocking laughter coming through the audio feed loud and clear. She was telling Marcus how incredibly easy it was to put me in my place, and how she could not wait to redecorate the house once the divorce was finalized. I locked my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and grabbed the heavy handles of my luggage. A cold, dangerous smile spread across my face. They thought they were kicking me out into the street. They had absolutely no idea that I had just turned their safe haven into a live, high-definition broadcast of their own destruction. I gripped the handles of my heavy suitcases and rolled them out of the master bedroom, the wheels gliding silently over the plush hallway carpet. As I reached the top of the grand staircase, a sudden violent crack of thunder rattled the large glass windows of the foyer. The sky outside had turned a bruised, menacing shade of dark purple. A classic torrential Atlanta afternoon thunderstorm had just rolled in, dropping a massive sheet of heavy rain over the manicured lawns of our affluent Buckhead neighborhood. I began my descent down the hardwood stairs. I fully expected Marcus and Chloe to be waiting at the bottom to gloat to watch me walk out the front door in absolute disgrace. But Marcus was not satisfied with a quiet, polite departure. He did not just want me gone, he wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to entirely humiliate me and strip away every ounce of my dignity before I left, solidifying his narrative that I was the unstable, crazy wife who was being rightfully discarded. As soon as my foot hit the bottom step, Marcus stepped forward and aggressively ripped the handles of the suitcases right out of my hands. The sudden force nearly pulled me off balance, but I caught myself planting my feet firmly on the marble floor. "Get out!" Marcus spat. His face twisted into an ugly, unfamiliar mask of hostility. He was performing. He was putting on a show of dominant masculinity for the woman standing right behind him. Chloe stepped out from the living room, holding her smartphone up with the camera lens pointed directly at my face. The bright recording light was flashing. She had a sick, delighted smirk on her face, entirely thrilled by the prospect of capturing my absolute lowest moment on high-definition video. Let the whole neighborhood see exactly how we deal with violent, unhinged women who cannot handle being corrected. Chloe taunted, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she narrated her video. "Say goodbye to the house you never deserved, Maya." Marcus turned around, marched toward the massive double mahogany doors, and shoved them wide open. The howling wind and the freezing, driving rain immediately whipped into the grand foyer, soaking the expensive Persian rug. Without a single moment of hesitation, my husband lifted my heavy, expensive suitcases and violently hurled them out the front door. They flew through the pouring rain and crashed onto the flooded, muddy grass of our expansive front lawn. The impact popped the zipper of my largest bag open. Several of my designer dresses, silk blouses, and expensive leather shoes spilled out into the dark mud, instantly soaked and ruined by the torrential downpour. "Look at that!" Chloe laughed from the safety of the dry-covered porch, adjusting her phone to get a better angle of the ruined clothes in the mud. "I guess you will be going back to shopping at discount stores where you belong. Keep walking, Maya. Do not make us call the police to forcibly remove you from the property." I stood in the doorway looking past them at the spectacle they had just created. The massive commotion had successfully drawn an audience. The wealthy residents of our exclusive quiet street were not the type to step outside in a storm, but they were certainly the type to watch a tragedy unfold from the comfort of their mansions. I could see Mrs. Abernathy from next door parting her heavy silk curtains to stare. I saw the headlights of a passing luxury SUV slow to a crawl in the street as the driver watched the prominent corporate executive throwing his wife's belongings into the mud. Marcus and Chloe were banking on my shame. They expected me to cover my face, to weep uncontrollably, to scramble desperately through the mud, to save my expensive clothes while begging them to stop. They wanted the neighborhood to see a broken, hysterical woman. They wanted a viral video of my absolute mental collapse to show the judge during their eventual divorce proceedings. I did not give them a single tear. I stepped past Marcus and walked slowly out the front door, leaving the dry shelter of the grand porch. I stepped directly into the torrential downpour. The freezing rain instantly soaked through my hair and my clothes, chilling my skin, but I did not shiver. I did not rush. I walked across the wet concrete driveway with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen surveying her territory. I stopped right next to my ruined luggage in the middle of the flooded lawn. I did not bend down to pick anything up. Instead, I slowly turned around to face the house. I looked up at Marcus and Chloe standing on the elevated dry porch. From down on the lawn, looking up through the heavy curtain of rain, I must have looked like a drowned, defeated animal to them. But the fire burning inside my chest was entirely untouchable. The cold rain washing over my face felt like a baptism. It was washing away the last remaining pathetic shreds of the obedient wife I had been pretending to be for the past 5 years. Chloe leaned over the porch railing, her phone still recording, waiting eagerly for my desperate, sobbing plea. I tilted my chin up, stared dead into the lens of her camera, and let out a sharp, cold laugh that cut right through the sound of the roaring thunder. "You think this hurts me?" I shouted, my voice perfectly steady, vibrating with an absolute terrifying authority that wiped the smug smile right off Chloe's face. "You think ruining a few pieces of fabric is going to break my spirit?" Marcus stepped forward, gripping the railing, suddenly looking very unsure of the situation. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. "I grew up with absolutely nothing." I continued, my words hitting them like physical blows in the freezing rain. "When I was 18 years old, I walked out of a state-run orphanage with exactly $50 to my name. All of my worldly possessions were stuffed into a single torn plastic grocery bag. I slept on subway trains. I ate out of vending machines. I built a multi-million-dollar federal auditing firm from the concrete up entirely by myself." I took a slow step forward, my eyes locking onto Chloe, pinning her in place. "You are a fragile, spoiled little girl who has never had to survive a single hard day in your entire pathetic life," I yelled, the rain streaming down my face. "You think a few wet Gucci bags in a public audience can make me cry, Chloe? You have absolutely no idea what kind of monster you just woke up. Keep the clothes. Keep the house. Keep my cheating, weak excuse of a husband. You are going to need every single penny you can steal when I am finished with you." The sheer dominant force of my words hung heavily in the stormy air. Chloe slowly lowered her phone, her hands visibly shaking. The arrogant, mocking light in her eyes had been entirely replaced by a sudden, undeniable flash of real fear. She had expected to bully a victim. She had just realized she was standing in the path of a hurricane. Marcus stood frozen on the porch, his face pale, unable to formulate a single word in defense. I did not wait for a response. The performance was over. I turned my back on them, bent down, and calmly grabbed the handles of the suitcases that were still intact. I dragged them over to my car parked in the driveway, popped the trunk, and threw them inside. I did not bother collecting the ruined dresses scattered in the mud. They were just material things. I was walking away with the only thing that actually mattered: the truth. I slammed the trunk shut, opened the driver's side door, and slid into the dry, quiet sanctuary of my car. I pushed the heavy, wet hair out of my face and started the engine. The heater immediately roared to life, blasting warm air across my freezing hands. I put the car in reverse and backed smoothly out of the long driveway. I did not peel out aggressively. I did not drive erratically. I glided down the affluent street with absolute calculated precision, leaving my husband and his mistress standing on the porch, staring silently after me in the pouring rain. As I turned the corner and drove out of the neighborhood, the chaotic adrenaline in my bloodstream began to level out into a cool, sharp focus. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my encrypted smartphone and mounted it securely on the dashboard holder. I opened the hidden surveillance application I had installed just 20 minutes ago. The screen flickered for a brief second before splitting into 3 crystal-clear high-definition video feeds. I smirked, a genuine, dangerous smile spreading across my face as I watched the live broadcast. The first camera showed the grand living room. Marcus and Chloe had just walked back inside, dripping a few drops of rainwater onto the marble floor. They looked completely rattled. Chloe was pacing back and forth, frantically texting someone on her phone, while Marcus poured himself a massive glass of scotch with trembling hands. The second camera provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the master bedroom, capturing every corner of their illicit sanctuary. The third camera beamed a flawless shot of Marcus's mahogany desk and his private safe in the home office. They thought they had just thrown me out into the cold. They thought they had secured the perimeter and won the war. They had absolutely no idea that they had just locked themselves inside a highly monitored digital prison of my own design. Every whispered secret, every illegal financial transaction, and every single moment of their pathetic affair was now being recorded and transmitted directly to my personal server. I turned up the heat in my car, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers pushing the heavy rain away. The worst part of the storm was over for me. But for Marcus and Chloe, the nightmare was just beginning. I merged onto the highway, heading toward a cheap, discreet motel on the edge of the city. I had a very important video conference call to make with Beatrice and a few highly interested federal agents, and it was time to establish a ghost trust in Delaware. The motel room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and harsh industrial bleach, a stark contrast to the lavender and cedarwood scent of the sprawling mansion I had just been thrown out of. I locked the flimsy brass deadbolt, pulled the heavy, stained blackout curtains shut against the stormy afternoon sky, and sat down at the rickety laminate desk in the corner of the room. I opened my laptop, the bright bluish light illuminating my face in the dark, quiet space. I was sitting in a roadside motel that cost $40 a night, but I had never felt more powerful or more completely in control. I was exactly where I needed to be. Before initiating the most important financial maneuver of my entire career, I checked the live surveillance feed from the hidden cameras back at the house. The video loaded instantly. Marcus and Chloe were standing in my pristine custom kitchen. Marcus was popping the cork on a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon, the expensive champagne spilling over the edges of the crystal flutes. They were toasting to their success. Chloe was throwing her head back, laughing hysterically, bragging about how easily she had outsmarted the uneducated little accountant. They were drinking my champagne, standing in my house, celebrating my supposed demise. I watched Marcus pull her close, kissing her deeply while the storm raged outside. Let them drink. Let them celebrate their hollow victory. Arrogance is the greatest blinder in the world. I switched tabs and launched a highly encrypted federal-grade video conferencing platform I reserved for high-level corporate espionage cases. 3 distinct digital squares popped up on my screen. In the first box was Beatrice. She was sitting in the private, soundproof study of the Buckhead estate, the heavy oak door firmly locked behind her. She looked sharp, composed, and entirely ready for war. In the second box was Special Agent Thomas from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man I had collaborated with closely on several massive corporate fraud takedowns. In the third box was Director Davis from the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I did not waste a single second with polite pleasantries. I immediately shared my screen, securely transmitting the mountain of digital evidence I had extracted from Marcus's hidden cloud server. I showed the federal agents the offshore routing numbers, the layered shell companies Chloe had set up, the forged commercial mortgage, and the 70-page petition for involuntary conservatorship. Special Agent Thomas leaned forward, his face hardening as he reviewed the documents. He confirmed that the wire fraud and the forged signatures were more than enough to secure immediate federal indictments. But Director Davis was the one who saw the true, terrifying genius of Chloe's impending legal trap. If Marcus and Chloe successfully pushed that emergency conservatorship through the state court, Marcus would gain total legal guardianship of Beatrice. He would have the immediate authority to liquidate the historical family assets and transfer the cash into untraceable offshore accounts before the federal government could even freeze the estate. We could not just arrest them. We had to move the money first. Beatrice nodded sharply through the camera. She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of highly specialized legal documents. We were not just moving money from one bank account to another. We were executing an impenetrable, aggressive financial maneuver known as a Delaware Irrevocable Ghost Trust. Delaware possesses some of the most stringent and impenetrable corporate privacy laws in the entire country. By establishing an irrevocable trust, Beatrice was taking the ultimate leap of faith. She was legally surrendering personal ownership of her entire generational empire. The wealth would no longer belong to her name, and therefore it could not be touched by any state-mandated conservatorship. It would belong to an anonymous, heavily guarded legal entity managed by a ghost trustee, which in this case was my forensic accounting firm. Under the strict, watchful eyes of the federal agents on the screen, Beatrice picked up her pen and began signing the digital transfers. It was a profoundly emotional moment, watching this fierce matriarch willingly sign away everything her ancestors had built. She transferred the deeds to the massive commercial skyscrapers downtown that her grandfather had purchased during the era of segregation. She transferred the sprawling residential complexes that had funded the family for decades. She moved the massive liquid cash reserves from the primary family investment portfolios. Millions upon millions of dollars in historic generational wealth seamlessly drained out of the original family estate and vanished into the impenetrable, invisible vault of the Delaware Trust. Beatrice was literally giving away her empire, but she was placing it in the safest digital fortress on Earth, completely out of her greedy son's reach. She would not let a privileged, arrogant woman from Harvard destroy the legacy of a proud Black family. But we did not just leave the original estate completely empty. If Chloe logged into the primary accounts and saw a zero balance, she would immediately panic and flee the country. We needed to keep them comfortable. We left the shiny shell of the estate entirely intact, but we poisoned the well. With the direct assistance of the IRS director, I meticulously restructured the estate's remaining tax liabilities. The massive high-interest commercial loan Marcus had fraudulently taken out in my name 3 years ago was legally uncoupled from my business. I pinned the entire debt directly to the primary estate holding company that Marcus and Chloe were fighting to control. The $5 million they were currently laundering was officially flagged by the federal government, attaching a massive, undeniable tax lien to the estate. I watched the final progress bar on my screen slowly hit 100%. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation message. The transfer was fully complete. The sprawling Buckhead mansion, the luxury cars, and the primary bank accounts that Chloe and Marcus were so desperately fighting to seize were no longer symbols of unimaginable wealth. They were financially radioactive. Beatrice looked into the camera, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her elegant face. "Thank you, Maya," she said softly. "Let them come for the crown now. They will find out it is made of lead." We ended the secure call. I leaned back in the cheap plastic chair of the motel room, letting the silence wash over me. I looked at the surveillance feed one last time. Marcus was pouring Chloe another glass of expensive champagne. They were laughing together on my couch, totally convinced they had just conquered an empire and discarded the annoying wife who stood in their way. They thought they were brilliant. They had absolutely no idea that they were drinking on the deck of a rapidly sinking ship. They were aggressively fighting for the captain's chair of a company that was now holding $8 million in toxic federal debt. The Delaware Ghost Trust was completely invisible to them. The trap was flawlessly set, the jaws wide open and waiting in the dark. All I had to do now was sit back and wait for them to proudly step right into it. For the next 30 days, my life became an exercise in absolute unwavering discipline. I moved out of the cheap roadside motel and leased a discreet, fully furnished apartment in downtown Atlanta under my corporate entity name. The space was completely stripped of any personal touches. It was not a home, it was a war room. I set up 3 massive monitors on a long glass desk, transforming the living area into a dedicated surveillance and financial tracking hub. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, vibrating with the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that always precedes a devastating hurricane. I barely slept. I lived on black coffee and the cold, hard adrenaline of impending justice. Through the hidden cameras I had planted inside my former home, I watched Marcus and Chloe live out their twisted fantasy. They moved with a sickening level of comfort and entitlement. Chloe officially moved her expensive wardrobe into my master bedroom. I watched her brutally rip down the custom silk curtains I had spent months picking out, replacing them with harsh modern blinds. I watched her throw my personal books into the trash. She was systematically erasing my existence from the house, trying to stamp her own identity over every single square inch of my life. But the redecorating was nothing compared to their financial recklessness. Marcus and Chloe genuinely believed they had successfully cornered Beatrice and secured the family empire. With that false sense of supreme victory, they began to spend money with an aggressive, almost manic intensity. They were using the primary estate corporate credit cards to fund a lavish, unchecked lifestyle. I tracked every single transaction in real time from my monitors. They bought a $70,000 sports car. They booked first-class tickets to Paris for a supposedly much-needed victory vacation. They purchased vintage Rolex watches and commissioned an exclusive interior designer to completely remodel the first floor of the Buckhead mansion. Every time they swiped that corporate card, they thought they were tapping into the endless generational wealth of Beatrice's historic estate. They had absolutely no idea that the accounts they were draining were legally tied to a radioactive corporate shell. The money they were so happily spending was essentially borrowed against the $8 million federal tax lien I had orchestrated with the IRS. They were not spending their inheritance. They were rapidly multiplying their own federal debt with every single luxury purchase. I documented every receipt, every wire transfer, and every fraudulent expense report, building a mountain of financial evidence so heavy it would eventually crush them both. However, the financial crimes were not what kept me awake at night. The true terrifying depth of their depravity was revealed on a quiet Tuesday evening, exactly 3 weeks into my surveillance. I was sitting in the dark glow of my monitors, watching the live feed from the camera, hidden in the chandelier above the living room. Marcus and Chloe were sitting on the couch, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The audio feed was crystal clear. Chloe opened her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a small amber prescription pill bottle. She placed it on the glass coffee table directly in front of Marcus. I turned up the volume on my headset, my blood running completely cold. "These are heavy prescription sedatives," Chloe whispered, tapping her manicured nail against the plastic bottle. "I got them from a private clinic using a fake name. The court-appointed psychiatric evaluator is scheduled to visit Beatrice next week to finalize the conservatorship report. If Beatrice sits there speaking clearly and acting perfectly normal, the judge might throw out our emergency petition. We cannot risk her having a good day when the evaluator arrives." Marcus stared at the bottle. He did not look horrified. He did not look like a son who was being asked to poison his own mother. He just looked calculating and impatient. "How do we give it to her without the nursing staff noticing?" Marcus asked, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. We crush them up, Chloe replied smoothly, as if she were discussing a recipe for dinner. When we visit her on Sunday for the weekly family brunch, we slip the powder into her herbal tea. It is completely tasteless. It will not kill her Marcus. It will just severely impair her cognitive functions for about 48 hours. She will slur her words. She will not remember her own name. She will look exactly like a woman suffering from advanced rapid-onset Alzheimer's disease. The evaluator will sign off on the incompetence paperwork immediately, and the judge will grant you full legal control by Friday. I stopped breathing. My hands gripped the edge of my glass desk so tightly, my knuckles turned entirely white. This was no longer just a case of white-collar fraud or adultery. This was a premeditated conspiracy to commit elder abuse and physical assault. They were actively planning to drug an elderly woman to steal her money. I immediately recorded the footage, encrypted the file, and sent it directly to Special Agent Thomas at the FBI. Within 10 minutes, my secure phone rang. It was Beatrice. I had already warned her about the conversation. "Do not intervene." Beatrice commanded, her voice steady and completely fearless over the encrypted line. "Let them come on Sunday. Let them try to drug me. I will pour the tea into the potted plant when they look away, and I will play the part of the heavily sedated, confused old woman to absolute perfection. We need them to feel untouchable, Maya. We need them to walk into the gala next week, believing they hold the entire world in the palm of their hands." Beatrice was right. The 40-year anniversary celebration of the family's charitable foundation was only days away. It was the most important social event of the year for the Black elite in Atlanta. Hundreds of influential guests, politicians, and corporate leaders would be gathered in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel. For decades, Beatrice had hosted the gala with unmatched grace and authority. But this year, Marcus and Chloe were planning to use the prestigious event as their own personal coronation. They were going to publicly announce Beatrice's tragic decline and officially step up as the new undisputed rulers of the family empire. The tension in my apartment was almost unbearable. Every day felt like holding my breath underwater. I watched the clock. I gathered the receipts. I waited. On the morning of the gala, my personal cell phone buzzed on the glass desk. It was a text message from Marcus. It was the first time he had contacted me directly since he threw my suitcases into the pouring rain a month ago. I opened the message, staring at the arrogant, cruel words glowing on the screen. "Maya," the text read, "I know you are probably still struggling to get by, but I need to clean up my loose ends before I officially take over the estate tonight. I am leaving an invitation to the Foundation Gala at the front desk of the Four Seasons under your name. Come to the event. Put on a cheap dress stand in the back and sign the divorce papers I had Chloe draft for you. If you sign them quietly, without causing a pathetic scene, I will write you a check for $10,000 right there on the spot. Take the charity. You are going to need it to pay your rent. Do not make me destroy your little accounting firm." I read the text 3 times, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. $10,000. He was offering me a petty, insulting $10,000 to quietly walk away from the man who ruined my life and tried to send me to federal prison. He truly believed I was a broken, desperate woman, hiding in the shadows, terrified of his power. I did not reply to his message. I simply locked my phone and stood up from my desk. I walked into my bedroom and unzipped the heavy protective garment bag hanging in my closet. Inside was a stunning, custom-tailored crimson-red silk gown I had purchased specifically for this exact night. Marcus wanted me to come to the gala. He wanted me to stand in the back and sign away my life. I was absolutely going to attend his little coronation. But I was not bringing a pen to sign his divorce papers. I was bringing the federal government, the IRS, and enough high-definition evidence to burn his entire stolen kingdom to the ground. The storm was finally here. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel was a breathtaking display of wealth, power, and deeply entrenched privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden light over a sea of tailored tuxedos and designer evening gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and imported floral arrangements. This was not just a simple anniversary party, it was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. Prominent state politicians, federal judges, and the most influential corporate leaders in the city were gathered to celebrate the 40-year legacy of Beatrice and her massive charitable foundation. Clustered near the front row were dozens of elegant women wearing subtle accents of salmon pink and apple green. They were Beatrice's devoted sisters from the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. They were a formidable network of educated, powerful Black women who commanded immense respect in every room they entered, and they loved my mother-in-law fiercely. The heavy mahogany doors to the ballroom swung open. The subtle hum of classical music and polite networking continued, but as I stepped over the threshold, a sudden ripple of quiet whispers began to spread through the back of the room. I was not wearing the cheap, submissive, invisible dress Marcus had demanded. I was wearing a custom-tailored crimson-red silk gown that flowed around me like liquid fire. The bold color was a highly deliberate choice. It was not just a dress, it was a declaration of absolute war. I walked across the plush carpet with my head held high, my heels clicking softly with total authority. People instinctively parted ways for me, their eyes darting rapidly between my confident posture and the main stage. I scanned the massive room and immediately spotted my targets. Marcus was standing near the grand podium looking incredibly handsome and completely in his element in a bespoke velvet tuxedo. He was shaking hands with city council members and flashing his charismatic, heavily practiced smile. Chloe stood right by his side, draped in an expensive emerald green gown that was ultimately paid for by my stolen business equity. She was holding a crystal flute of champagne, playing the role of the supportive, brilliant legal partner to absolute perfection. They looked like royalty preparing to inherit their kingdom. And then I saw Beatrice. She was seated in a plush velvet armchair near the edge of the stage, flanked tightly by two private nurses Chloe had hired. Beatrice was giving the performance of a lifetime. Her usually sharp, commanding posture was completely gone. She was slightly slumped forward in her seat, her eyes staring blankly at the floral centerpieces on the table. When one of her sorority sisters gently touched her arm to say a warm hello, Beatrice offered a slow, confused smile, perfectly mimicking the heavy sedation Marcus and Chloe thought they had successfully slipped into her morning herbal tea. I felt a massive surge of fierce, protective pride for my mother-in-law. She was playing their twisted evil game flawlessly, drawing them further and further into the trap, without them suspecting a single thing. Marcus finally spotted me walking through the crowd. The charming diplomatic smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a tight, incredibly dark warning glare. He quickly whispered something into Chloe's ear, excused himself from a conversation with the mayor, and marched directly toward me. He intercepted me near the back of the ballroom, his hand gripping my elbow with a painful bruising force as he quickly pulled me behind a large marble pillar out of sight from the main crowd. "You actually wore that?" Marcus hissed, his eyes scanning my crimson dress with pure, unadulterated disgust. "I specifically told you to stand in the back and be completely quiet. You are making a pathetic spectacle of yourself." He reached inside his tailored velvet jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were the heavily biased divorce papers Chloe had drafted for him. He shoved the envelope hard against my chest, along with a sleek silver pen. "Sign the papers right now, Maya," he commanded, his voice dropping into a vicious whisper. "Sign them. Take your $10,000 check and get out of this hotel before I have the security team drag you out into the street. You do not belong in this family anymore. Do not make me ruin your little accounting firm. I will bankrupt you by tomorrow morning if you do not comply." I looked down at the envelope in my hands, then back up into his cold, arrogant eyes. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I did not let a single ounce of fear show on my face. I calmly took the envelope and the silver pen from his hands, sliding them gracefully into my small clutch purse. "Thank you for the generous offer, Marcus." I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, perfectly steady and calm. I will be sure to give these legal documents exactly the attention they deserve. Marcus sneered, clearly satisfied that his aggressive intimidation tactics had worked once again. He truly believed he had just neutralized his final annoying obstacle. Do not cause a scene. He warned one last time before turning his back on me and walking confidently back to the brightly lit stage. He adjusted his bow tie, ready to claim his stolen empire. A few minutes later, the classical music slowly faded out. The massive room grew entirely quiet as Marcus stepped up to the grand podium, tapping the microphone lightly. Chloe stood elegantly slightly behind him, her hands clasped respectfully in front of her. The spotlight hit Marcus, and he looked out over the sea of influential faces with an expression of profound, perfectly manufactured sorrow. Good evening, distinguished guests, friends and family. Marcus began, his voice thick with fake emotion that echoed through the ballroom speakers. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate 40 incredible years of this charitable foundation. But tonight is also a night of deep personal transition for our family. As many of you know, my mother Beatrice, the brilliant architect of this entire empire, has been battling a rapid and severe decline in her cognitive health. He paused, looking down at the podium and taking a shaky breath, playing the heartbroken devoted son for the cameras snapping in the back of the room. It has been a devastating, painful journey. Her mind, once sharp enough to outsmart the toughest corporate rivals in this city, is tragically slipping away from us. Because of her rapidly worsening condition, she can no longer manage the immense financial and legal responsibilities of the estate. A collective gasp of genuine sympathy rippled through the crowded ballroom. The AKA sisters in the front row looked at Beatrice with profound sorrow, totally unaware of the monstrous lies being spun right in front of them. Chloe then stepped forward to share the microphone, placing a comforting, gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. As the family's lead legal counsel, Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial empathy and professional concern, I have worked tirelessly to ensure Beatrice's legacy is fiercely protected from exploitation. After extensive medical evaluations this week, the courts have officially granted Marcus full legal conservatorship over the entire estate. Together, Marcus and I are officially taking over the family assets to ensure this foundation continues to thrive for generations to come. The room erupted into polite, highly supportive applause. The elite members of society were clapping for a hostile corporate takeover. They were cheering for a son who had actively plotted to drug his own mother to steal her wealth. They thought they were witnessing a beautiful passing of the torch. I stood in the center aisle of the ballroom, the heavy manila envelope burning a hole in my clutch. The time for hiding in the shadows, collecting receipts, and playing the submissive wife was officially over. I reached over to a passing waiter's tray and picked up a heavy crystal wine glass. I took the silver pen Marcus had just given me and tapped it firmly against the fragile glass. The sharp, piercing ring echoed through the massive ballroom, cutting through the applause like a physical blade. The clapping abruptly stopped. Hundreds of heads turned in unison to look at the woman radiating in the crimson-red dress. I did not stop walking. I moved gracefully down the center aisle, my eyes locked dead onto Marcus and Chloe. I reached the edge of the stage and calmly stepped onto the carpeted stairs, my heels sinking into the fabric. I lifted my wine glass toward them, offering a chilling, completely victorious smile. That was a beautiful, deeply heartbreaking speech, Marcus, I said, my voice projecting clearly and powerfully across the silent, stunned room without even needing a microphone. But before you officially announce your hostile takeover to the entire city, perhaps everyone in this room should review the latest financial report. Marcus froze, his hand hovering over the microphone stand. The color rapidly drained from his perfectly groomed face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost in the bright stage lights. Chloe immediately stepped backward, her emerald green gown suddenly looking far less regal and far more like a cheap costume. She looked wildly around the room, signaling frantically to the hotel security guards stationed near the grand entrance. But the guards did not move an inch. They were under strict instructions from the hotel management, And earlier that evening, Beatrice had quietly ensured the management knew exactly who was actually paying the bill for this lavish event. "Get her off this stage right now!" Marcus finally yelled, his charismatic facade completely shattering. He lunged toward me, his arm outstretched to grab the stem of my wine glass. "He is having a mental breakdown." Someone cut the microphone, but I was entirely out of his reach. With lightning speed and perfectly practiced precision, I sidestepped his desperate grasp. I walked straight past the grand podium and moved directly to the advanced audio-visual control panel situated at the far edge of the stage. The hotel technician manning the board took one look at my face, recognized the absolute unwavering authority in my eyes, and wisely took a massive step back, giving me total control of the system. I reached into my small red clutch purse and pulled out my encrypted smartphone and a specialized adapter cable. I did not rush. I wanted them to feel every single agonizing second of the suspense. The silence in the massive ballroom was deafening. Hundreds of elite guests, politicians, and corporate titans were holding their breath, their eyes glued to the woman in the crimson dress who had just hijacked the most prestigious gala of the year. I plugged my phone directly into the main projector feed. The massive 30-foot digital screens positioned behind the stage instantly flickered to life. The glowing foundation logo vanished, replaced by a pitch-black screen. "Stop her!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic as she finally realized exactly what I was doing. She hiked up the heavy silk skirt of her gown and sprinted across the stage toward me, her designer heels clicking frantically against the wood floor. Marcus scrambled behind her, his face twisted in absolute horror. They were exactly 5 seconds too late. I tapped the play button on my glowing screen. What illuminated the massive screens behind them was not a complex financial spreadsheet. It was not a bank statement or a boring corporate tax return. It was a high-definition, crystal-clear video file I had extracted directly from Marcus's hidden cloud server. It was a video he had arrogantly filmed himself on his own phone just a few months prior, a sick, twisted trophy of his ultimate betrayal. The video did not show a hotel room. It showed the distinct, recognizable interior of Julian's private home office. And right there, spread across Julian's priceless antique mahogany desk, were Marcus and Chloe. They were completely naked, heavily intertwined, and having incredibly passionate, aggressive sex. The sheer visual shock of the 50-foot projection was magnified 1,000 times by the audio. The highly sensitive ballroom speakers designed to amplify classical orchestras suddenly blasted the explicit, unmistakable sounds of their heavy breathing and loud moans across the entire room. But the sex was not even the most devastating part of the video. It was the dialogue. Right in the middle of the act, Marcus pulled back, holding the camera high above them to capture both of their faces. He looked down at his brother's wife, a sick, arrogant grin plastered across his face. "Tell me who is the better brother," Marcus demanded on the video, his voice echoing through the silent, horrified ballroom. "You are," Chloe gasped on the screen, tossing her head back and laughing cruelly. "Julian is so weak. He is so pathetic. He actually thinks I am working late on estate contracts tonight." Marcus laughed loudly on the video. "Let the idiot pay the mortgage while I take his wife. And as soon as I get rid of my annoying little accountant of a wife, we will take the entire family empire too." I tapped the screen again, freezing the video on a massive, undeniable close-up of their flushed, laughing faces, entirely exposing their monstrous betrayal for the entire world to see. The ballroom erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos. It was like a bomb had just detonated inside the Four Seasons. The collective gasp from hundreds of guests sounded like a massive vacuum sucking all the air out of the room. Several older women in the audience covered their mouths in pure shock, dropping their expensive champagne flutes onto the carpeted floor. The Alpha Kappa Alpha sisters in the front row stood up simultaneously, their faces hardened into masks of absolute outrage and disgust. They glared at Marcus as if he were a disgusting insect that needed to be immediately crushed under their heels. But the most heartbreaking, explosive reaction came from the front table. Julian, my sweet, trusting brother-in-law, stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair tipped over backward and crashed to the floor. The color had completely vanished from his face. His eyes were wide, darting frantically between the massive frozen image on the screen and his wife standing on the stage. He looked like a man who had just been violently stabbed in the chest and was slowly realizing he was bleeding to death. Julie Chloe cried out, her voice trembling with sheer terror. She stopped running toward me and turned to face her husband, holding her hands out in a desperate, pathetic, pleading gesture. Julian, please, it is not what it looks like. It is a deep fake. She edited the video. Julian did not say a single word. He did not cry. A terrifying primal rage suddenly washed over his features, completely erasing his usually gentle demeanor. He leaped onto the stage, bypassing the small set of stairs entirely. He charged past Chloe, as if she did not even exist, his eyes locked dead onto his own brother. Marcus raised his hands in a defensive posture, trying to backpedal away. Julian, wait, let me explain. Marcus stammered, his voice pathetic and weak. Julian did not let him explain. He closed the distance in 3 massive strides, pulled his arm back, and delivered a brutal, devastating punch directly to Marcus's jaw. The sickening crack of bone hitting bone echoed through the microphone that Marcus had carelessly dropped onto the podium. Marcus was thrown violently backward by the sheer force of the blow. He crashed hard onto the polished wooden floor of the stage, sliding a few feet before coming to a stop near Beatrice's chair. Blood instantly exploded from his nose, and split lips staining the pristine white collar of his expensive custom tuxedo shirt. He curled into a pathetic ball, groaning in deep, agonizing pain, holding his shattered face. Julian stood over him, his fists still tightly clenched, his chest heaving with heavy, ragged breaths. "You disgusting, treacherous coward!" Julian roared, his voice breaking with profound heartbreak. "You slept with my wife in my own house. You are dead to me. You are absolutely dead to me." Down in the audience, the humiliation was spreading like an aggressive wildfire. Sitting at a prominent VIP table near the front were Chloe's parents and her extended family. They were a deeply arrogant, old, money-white family who had always looked down on Beatrice and her legacy. Now they were the center of the greatest scandal in Atlanta history. Her father, a prominent corporate judge, turned a deep, furious shade of crimson red. He refused to even look up at the stage. Chloe's mother buried her face in her hands, physically shaking from the sheer, overwhelming shame of watching her Ivy League daughter be exposed as a cruel, adulterous parasite in front of the city's entire elite class. They were completely disgraced. Chloe realized she had just lost everything. Her husband despised her. Her prominent family was humiliated. Her flawless, sophisticated reputation was entirely destroyed in a matter of seconds. But instead of showing an ounce of remorse, the deep-rooted, toxic entitlement inside of her violently clawed its way to the surface. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always lash out. She scrambled across the stage, her perfectly styled hair now a wild, disheveled mess. She reached the grand podium, grabbed the microphone with trembling, desperate hands, and turned to face me. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, filled with a frantic, unhinged madness. "What do you think you are accomplishing with this?" Chloe screamed into the microphone, her shrill voice echoing painfully through the speakers, desperately trying to reclaim her power. "You think showing a dirty video makes you a winner, Maya? You think this ruins me?" She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, a manic, terrifying smile spreading across her pale lips. "You are nothing but a jealous, bitter little accountant trying to smear her betters. But you are too late. You hear me? You are way too late." Chloe turned back to the horrified audience, gripping the edges of the podium so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "This morning, a state judge reviewed my medical affidavits," she yelled, her voice dripping with venomous triumph. "The court officially signed the emergency conservatorship order. It is legally binding. The papers are already filed. Control over this family's entire $20 million estate, every single bank account, every single property, now legally belongs to Marcus and me. We own it all. You can hate us, but you cannot touch our money." I stood perfectly still at the edge of the stage, letting the shrill, desperate echo of Chloe's unhinged declaration fade into the cavernous ceiling of the grand ballroom. She stood there gripping the wooden podium, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with the manic energy of a woman who genuinely believed she had just played the ultimate trump card. The entire room of elite guests sat in stunned, breathless silence, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her hostile takeover. Chloe thought her words were an impenetrable shield. She thought the state court order was her absolute guarantee of victory. I looked down at her from my position, the bright stage lights catching the crimson-red silk of my gown. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her frantic screaming energy. Instead, I let a slow, chilling, and completely victorious smile spread across my face. I stepped up to the podium, entirely ignoring the bleeding, pathetic form of my husband curled up on the floor. I reached out and calmly pulled the microphone stand away from Chloe's trembling hands. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice projecting with a deep, unwavering authority that commanded every single inch of the massive room. "You legally filed the paperwork this morning. You marched right into a state courtroom, presented fabricated medical affidavits, and demanded an emergency conservatorship over the primary family estate." "Yes," Chloe spat back, her voice shaking, but still laced with toxic arrogance. "The judge signed it. It is legally binding. The $20 million belongs to us. You cannot do a single thing about it." I let out a soft, pitying laugh, shaking my head as if I were dealing with a deeply confused child. "A Harvard-educated corporate lawyer," I said, slowly emphasizing every single word, so it echoed clearly in the silent ballroom. "A brilliant legal mind who claims to be the intellectual savior of this family. And yet you were so blinded by your own staggering greed that you did not even bother to check the updated corporate tax identification numbers before you filed a Supreme Court petition." Chloe blinked, a sudden, sharp flash of confusion cutting through her manic bravado. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, taking a hesitant step backward. I turned my back on her for a fraction of a second, tapping a single command into the encrypted application on my phone. The massive digital screens behind us instantly shifted. The explicit video of their affair vanished instantly, replaced by a series of highly complex, heavily redacted federal financial documents. The glowing seals of the Internal Revenue Service and the state of Delaware illuminated the stage. "If you had bothered to do a basic forensic audit of the estate you were trying to steal," I explained, looking out at the captivated audience of judges and corporate leaders who were now leaning forward in their seats, "you would have noticed a massive structural change. The $20 million in liquid assets, commercial real estate, and historic trust funds that you mentioned are no longer sitting in the primary family accounts. Last month, under the direct supervision of federal agents, every single penny of that generational wealth was legally and permanently transferred into an anonymous, irrevocable ghost trust located in Delaware." The color completely drained from Chloe's face. Her mouth dropped open, but no sound came out. On the floor, Marcus stopped groaning and slowly lifted his bruised, bloody face, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he stared at the federal documents displayed on the screen. "That is impossible," Chloe finally gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "I checked the routing numbers last week. The shell companies I set up were still linked to the primary estate." "Yes," I replied, my smile sharpening into something lethal. "You checked the routing numbers of the external shell, but you did not check the core holding company. We left the shiny exterior of the estate completely intact so you and Marcus would feel comfortable enough to keep spending money on your corporate credit cards. But the accounts are entirely empty, Chloe. The $20 million is completely gone, securely locked away in a federal fortress that your state court conservatorship cannot legally touch." The murmurs in the ballroom began to rise again. The financial titans in the audience immediately recognized the brilliance of the Delaware Trust maneuver. They knew it was an impenetrable wall. Chloe's father, The prominent judge, sitting at the VIP table, buried his face in his hands, realizing his daughter had just publicly confessed to filing a fraudulent conservatorship for an empty bank account. But I was not finished. Taking their money away was only the first half of the trap. The second half was the execution. But do not worry, Chloe, I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the speakers. Your emergency conservatorship petition was not completely useless. In fact, it was incredibly effective. By rushing to the courthouse this morning and demanding an emergency transfer of power, you intentionally bypassed the standard 30-day legal due diligence period. You waived your right to a comprehensive financial audit because you were so desperate to lock Beatrice away before she could stop you. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, forcing the arrogant Harvard lawyer to shrink back against the grand podium. When you and Marcus signed those papers this morning, asserting yourselves as the sole legal and financial guardians of the primary estate, you did not just claim the assets, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, deadly register. You claimed the legal liabilities. And the hollow shell company you just fought so aggressively to control is currently carrying a massive radioactive burden. I tapped my phone one last time. The screen behind us shifted to a massive, undeniable federal tax lien document. The bright red stamp of the Internal Revenue Service was clearly visible at the top of the page. 3 years ago, Marcus forged my signature on a massive commercial mortgage to fund your boutique law firm. I explained to the crowd, watching the absolute destruction dawn on Chloe's face. And for the past 6 months, you two have been using my federal auditing license to launder $5 million out of the estate. But when we moved the real wealth to Delaware, I worked directly with the director of the IRS. We uncoupled that massive debt from my name and pinned every single fraudulent dollar directly to the primary estate. Chloe began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved rapidly, her hands clutching the fabric of her expensive gown as the walls of the trap violently crushed her. Congratulations, Chloe, I said, raising my wine glass in a mocking toast. You just used your prestigious Harvard law degree and your supreme arrogance to legally bind yourself and your lover to an $8 million federal tax debt. You do not own a $20 million empire. You own an $8 million federal crime. And because you filed the paperwork as an officer of the court, you are personally and professionally liable for every single penny of it. Marcus let out a guttural, agonizing scream from the floor. He slammed his fists against the wooden stage, crying hysterically, the blood from his shattered nose smearing across his face. He realized his life was entirely over. He had no money, no wife, no family, and an insurmountable mountain of federal debt strapped directly to his name. Chloe stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the carpeted stage. She lost her balance and collapsed onto the floor next to Marcus, her perfect, sophisticated facade completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She grabbed her hair, shaking her head frantically, chanting the word "no" over and over again in a pathetic, broken loop. Down in the audience, the reaction was swift and merciless. Chloe's parents stood up from their VIP table and practically sprinted toward the exit doors, abandoning their disgraced daughter to avoid being photographed near the epicenter of the massive federal crime. Julian stood near the edge of the stage, looking down at his cheating wife and his treacherous brother with an expression of cold, absolute disgust. He turned his back on them and calmly walked out of the ballroom, leaving them to their spectacular ruin. I looked out over the silent, shocked crowd, then turned my gaze to the velvet armchair on the side of the stage. Beatrice, who had spent the entire evening slumped in her chair pretending to be heavily sedated, slowly sat up perfectly straight. She reached up calmly, smoothed a stray lock of hair perfectly into place, and removed the thin reading glasses from her face. She looked down at her sobbing son and her ruined daughter-in-law, with eyes as hard and cold as black diamonds. "I told you to be careful who you underestimate," Beatrice said clearly, her voice entirely sharp and lucid, completely destroying the last remaining shred of Chloe's medical affidavits. The absolute finality of the moment hung heavily in the grand ballroom. The hostile takeover had been brutally dismantled. The elite society of Atlanta had just witnessed the most calculated, devastating financial execution in the city's history. And right on cue, as if the universe itself were providing the dramatic score to their downfall, a loud, piercing sound broke through the heavy silence of the Four Seasons Hotel. It started as a faint wail in the distance, quickly amplifying as it rapidly approached the building. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect brightly against the massive glass windows of the grand ballroom. The wailing of multiple police sirens completely surrounded the hotel, signaling the immediate arrival of the federal authorities. The flashing red and blue lights, reflecting against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, cast an eerie rhythmic strobe effect across the silent ballroom. The wailing sirens abruptly cut off, replaced by the heavy synchronized thud of tactical boots marching across the marble floors of the hotel lobby. The massive double mahogany doors of the grand ballroom were pushed open with such violent force that they slammed against the walls, shaking the ornate picture frames hanging nearby. A dozen federal agents poured into the room, their dark windbreakers clearly emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS. They moved with absolute terrifying precision, radiating an undeniable authority that instantly paralyzed everyone in their path. The elite guests of Atlanta high society, people who were used to giving orders and bending the world to their will, immediately shrank back, instinctively parting like the Red Sea to clear a wide path to the stage. Leading the tactical formation was Special Agent Thomas. He did not look impressed by the crystal chandeliers or the expensive silk gowns. His face was a mask of cold professional determination. He marched straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked dead onto the two crumbling figures still lingering on the grand stage. Chloe saw them coming and completely lost her mind. The sophisticated, untouchable corporate lawyer vanished, replaced by a frantic trapped animal. She scrambled backward, her high heels slipping on the polished wood floor. She bumped into the heavy wooden podium, knocking it over with a loud crash that echoed through the room. "You cannot be here!" Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical, grating register. She pointed a trembling finger at the approaching agents. "This is a private, exclusive event. You have absolutely no jurisdiction to barge in here without a warrant." Special Agent Thomas did not even break his stride. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick stack of folded legal documents, and slammed them down onto the nearest VIP dinner table. "Chloe, Corporate Counsel." Thomas announced, his voice booming across the ballroom, loud enough for every single politician and judge in the room to hear clearly. "I have federal arrest warrants issued by the United States Department of Justice. You and Marcus are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, securities, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse and financial exploitation." Two female FBI agents immediately stepped up onto the stage, flanking Chloe on both sides. They reached for her arms, their movements swift and entirely unsympathetic. "Get your hands off of me!" Chloe screamed violently, thrashing her shoulders to shake off their grip. Her face was flushed, dark red, contorted in absolute rage and disbelief. "You cannot do this to me. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my family is? My father is a sitting corporate judge." She looked desperately into the crowd, searching for her parents' VIP table, completely oblivious to the fact that they had already fled the building out of sheer shame. Daddy, Chloe wailed, her eyes frantically scanning the sea of horrified faces. "Daddy, tell them to stop. Call the governor. Call my partners at the firm. I went to Harvard Law School. I'm a prominent corporate attorney. You cannot treat me like a common criminal. I will sue this entire department. I will have your badges. I will destroy your careers." She was fully invoking the ultimate shield of her white privilege. She was screaming the spells that had protected her entire life, expecting the federal agents to suddenly realize they had made a terrible mistake, apologize for the inconvenience, and let her walk away. She expected the system to bow to her pedigree, her skin color, and her expensive education. But the federal agents were completely unfazed. Special Agent Thomas looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You can cite your Harvard degree to the federal judge at your bail hearing, ma'am," Thomas said coldly. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." When Chloe refused to comply, still thrashing and screaming threats, the two female agents did not hesitate. They forcefully grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back with practiced efficiency. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around her wrists echoed through the room. It was the absolute sound of her entire privileged life coming to a brutal, permanent end. She sobbed hysterically, her expensive emerald green gown tearing at the hem as they aggressively marched her off the stage and down the center aisle, parading her humiliation in front of the exact high society crowd she had tried to rule. As Chloe was dragged away, the remaining agents turned their attention to Marcus. Marcus had not tried to run. He had not tried to invoke his connections. He knew exactly how the criminal justice system worked, and he knew that as a black man, caught in a massive federal crime, he did not have the luxury of screaming at the FBI. He was completely broken. His face was still covered in blood from Julian's devastating punch. His bespoke velvet tuxedo was ruined. When Agent Thomas stepped toward him holding a second pair of steel handcuffs, Marcus completely collapsed. His legs gave out beneath him and he fell heavily onto his knees. The arrogant, charismatic golden boy of the family was gone. In his place was a terrified, pathetic coward. He did not look at me. He did not look at the agents. He dragged himself across the carpeted stage, on his knees, leaving a trail of blood on the floor, and crawled directly toward the velvet armchair where his mother was sitting. "Mom," Marcus wept, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Mom, please, you have to tell them to stop. You have to tell them this is all a huge misunderstanding." He reached out with his trembling hands, trying to grab the fabric of Beatrice's dress, but an FBI agent immediately stepped on his wrist, pinning his arm to the floor. Marcus screamed in pain but continued to beg, tears streaming down his bruised face. "It was not my idea, Mom. I swear to God." Marcus sobbed frantically, throwing his mistress under the bus the exact second he faced consequences. "Chloe made me do it. She manipulated me. She drew up all the contracts. She told me the estate was bleeding money and we needed to save it. I was just trying to protect the family legacy. Please, Mom, I am your son. You cannot let them take me to federal prison. I will not survive in there. You know I will not survive. Just tell them to let me go. I will do whatever you want. I will sign anything. Just please save me." He was crying so hard he was choking on his own blood and tears. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the former heir to a $20 million empire begged for his life like a frightened child. The Alpha sisters in the front row looked at him with absolute disgust, shaking their heads at the sheer cowardice of a man willing to sell out his own mother, his own wife, and his own brother for money. I stood nearby, my arms crossed, watching the pathetic display with cold detachment. I had spent years of my life sacrificing my own comfort to build this man up. I had paid for his education, I had supported his career. I had endured the constant belittling comments from his family because I loved him. And here he was entirely stripped of my protection, revealing the hollow, spineless core he had been hiding all along. The FBI agents pulled Marcus roughly up from the floor by his shoulders. They slammed him against the wooden podium, kicking his legs apart to frisk him. He sobbed uncontrollably as they pulled his arms behind his back and locked the cold steel cuffs around his wrists. He continued to crane his neck, looking desperately over his shoulder at Beatrice, waiting for the powerful matriarch to raise her hand, stop the authorities, and shield her golden child from the consequences of his own actions, just like she had always done. But Beatrice did not raise her hand. She sat in her velvet armchair for a long, heavy moment. Then, with agonizing slowness, She placed her hands on the wooden armrests and pushed herself up. She did not lean on the nurses. She did not stumble. She stood perfectly straight, her posture as rigid and commanding as a general inspecting a battlefield. She reached up with elegant, steady fingers and slowly removed the thin reading glasses from her face, folding them with a sharp snap. Beatrice looked down at the pathetic, bleeding man groveling at her feet. If this were a movie, the camera would be locked in a tight close-up on her authoritative face, capturing the exact moment a mother's unconditional love was permanently extinguished by betrayal. Then the view would slowly pull back, widening, to reveal the massive, irreversible distance that had just opened up between her and her son. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Marcus stared up at her with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for the maternal instinct he had exploited his entire life to finally kick in and save him. But the woman looking back at him was not the gentle mother he remembered. She was the ruthless, calculating matriarch of a dynasty, and she was looking at a traitor. "I gave birth to you, Marcus," Beatrice said, her voice echoing with a chilling absolute calm that cut deeper than any scream ever could. "But I absolutely did not give birth to your stupidity and your betrayal." She took a slow step forward, looking down at him with a mixture of profound disappointment and cold disgust. "You thought I was a weak, confused old woman. You thought you could drug me, lock me in a psychiatric ward, and hand over everything my grandfather built to a woman who despises everything we represent. This family was built with the sweat, the tears, and the blood of people of color who survived unimaginable hardships. They built this empire from the ground up when the world told them they were nothing." Beatrice briefly shifted her icy gaze to where Chloe was standing in handcuffs, struggling against the federal agents. "I would rather burn this entire foundation to the ground with my own two hands than let that arrogant, entitled woman steal a single penny of my ancestors' legacy," Beatrice declared, her voice ringing out with undeniable power. "You sold out your own blood for a woman who only loved the numbers in your bank account. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences of it. Enjoy federal prison, son." The absolute finality of her words hit Marcus like a physical execution. He let out a gut-wrenching, broken sob, burying his bloody face into the carpeted stage. He knew it was over. His mother had just legally and emotionally severed him from the family tree. But the humiliation was not finished. The moment Beatrice delivered her final verdict, the fragile, toxic alliance between Marcus and Chloe violently shattered into a million pieces. Chloe, realizing that Marcus had completely failed to secure the estate and failed to protect her from the federal authorities, turned into a vicious, cornered viper. She stopped fighting the FBI agents and whipped her head around to glare at her lover. "You are completely useless!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorted with pure hatred. She spat the words at him with such venom that even the seasoned federal agents looked slightly taken aback. "I ruined my entire life for you. You promised me $20 million. You told me your mother was weak and your wife was a stupid, gullible accountant. You are nothing but a pathetic, incompetent idiot who cannot even execute a simple legal trap. I hate you. You ruined everything." Marcus did not even have the strength to yell back. He just laid there sobbing hysterically into the floorboards, as the woman he had destroyed his marriage for publicly humiliated him in front of the entire city. Special Agent Thomas had seen enough of the pathetic display. He gave a sharp, authoritative nod to his tactical team. "Get them both out of my sight," Thomas ordered. The federal agents hoisted Marcus roughly to his feet. He was too weak and devastated to walk on his own, forcing two agents to practically drag him by his arms. Chloe was escorted aggressively by the female agents, her ruined designer gown trailing sadly behind her. They were paraded down the center aisle of the grand ballroom, flanked by the flashing cameras of the local press who had caught wind of the raid. Hundreds of elite guest politicians and high society titans watched the walk of shame in absolute silence. No one offered a word of sympathy. No one stepped forward to intervene. The Golden Child and the Harvard lawyer were dragged out the heavy mahogany doors of the Four Seasons, marched directly into the freezing Atlanta night, and shoved into the back of waiting federal police cruisers. The heavy metal doors of the police vehicles slammed shut, sealing their fate. Inside the ballroom, the blue and red lights finally faded away, leaving behind a stunned, exhausted silence. I stood near the edge of the stage, watching the doors close behind them. I felt a sudden massive weight lift off my chest. The suffocating anxiety and the constant grinding fear I had carried for the past month completely evaporated. I looked over at Beatrice, She was standing tall, staring at the empty doorway, with a complex expression of grief and immense relief. We had survived the ultimate betrayal, and we had won. That an Ivy League degree will not save you if you cross a self-made woman. If your family rejects you, do not cry. Stay silent and collect the receipts. Looking back at everything that happened, I realized that true wealth is not measured by trust funds, grand estates, or the prominent last names you inherit. True wealth is the resilience you build when you have absolutely nothing left to lose, and the courage to fight back when the world tells you to sit down. Marcus and Chloe had all the advantages this society could possibly offer, but their overwhelming greed made them incredibly poor in character. They are currently serving their 10-year state prison sentences in entirely separate facilities, completely stripped of the luxury and elite status they were willing to destroy their own family to keep. Julian is still undergoing his psychological treatment, but he recently reached out to me just to say thank you for opening his eyes. He is slowly learning to stand on his own 2 feet, finalizing his divorce, and finally living free from the toxic expectations of his past. As for my relationship with Beatrice, it has blossomed into a truly formidable partnership. We have dinners together every single Sunday, not out of hollow familial obligation, but out of genuine respect and profound love. The 5-story premium office building in Buckhead that she transferred to my name stands as a daily reminder of the empire we protected and the new legacy we are building together. My independent forensic accounting firm is thriving beyond my wildest dreams. Every single day, my team and I step into the financial battlefields to rescue women and elderly clients from fraud and exploitation. I took the darkest, most terrifying chapter of my life and turned it into an impenetrable fortress for others who cannot defend themselves. So to anyone watching this who feels entirely trapped, belittled, or manipulated by the toxic people in their lives, please know that your current situation is not your final destination. You have the ultimate power to rewrite your entire story. Do not let anyone intimidate you with their fancy titles, their Ivy League degrees, or their massive bank accounts. Keep your head held high fiercely. Protect your peace and always trust your own sharp intuition. The truth always leaves a paper trail, and as long as you have the patience to follow it, you will always win. Thank you so much for being here and letting me share my journey. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video far and wide. Your support helps spread this message and might just give another person the courage they desperately need to finally stand up, gather their evidence, and fight back. Take care of yourselves, stay strong, and never forget your absolute worth.